Picture this, a 120-year-old man stands before 2 million people, knowing these are his final words. For 40 years, he's been their leader, their voice of God, their protector. Now the promised land stretches before them, but he'll never cross that river. This is Moses' last chance to save a nation from destroying itself. What he says next will echo through 3,500 years of history and shape the foundation of Western civilization. Deuteronomy isn't just another book of laws, it's the dying breath of history's greatest leader, the blueprint for justice that inspired democracy, and the theological masterpiece that Jesus himself quoted more than any other Old Testament book. In the next 40 minutes, you'll discover why scholars call Deuteronomy the heart of the Bible, and how its revolutionary ideas about love, law, and human dignity changed the world forever. This is Moses' final sermon and humanity's inheritance. The sun was setting over the wilderness of Moab, casting long shadows across the camp of 2 million Israelites. Moses stood on a hill, looking across the Jordan River toward the land that had been promised to their fathers. His eyes were still clear, his strength undiminished, but he knew something the people didn't yet understand. These would be his final words to them. In the first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses began what would become his farewell address. He opened with simple words that carried the weight of 4 decades. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab, Deuteronomy 1:1. Each place name told a story. Hazeroth, where Miriam had been struck with leprosy, Dizahab, where the people had complained about the manna. This wasn't just geography, it was their biography. The phrase "beyond the Jordan" was deeply significant. They were so close to their destination they could see it, smell it, almost touch it. But Moses would not cross over with them. God had made that clear, and Moses had accepted it with the grace that comes only from years of walking with the Almighty. The old leader's voice carried across the vast assembly as he continued in verse 3, "In the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel, according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment to them." 40 years. An entire generation had lived and died in the wilderness. The people standing before him now were mostly the children and grandchildren of those who had left Egypt under his leadership. They had grown up with stories of plagues and miracles, but they needed to understand their story, their purpose, their destiny. Moses looked at the faces before him, young warriors who had never known the taste of slavery, mothers who had raised their children in the freedom of the desert, fathers who had learned to trust God for daily bread falling from heaven. These people would inherit what their parents had forfeited through fear and unbelief. But first, they needed to hear the truth about their journey, both the triumphs and the failures. The weight of transition pressed on Moses' shoulders. For 4 decades, he had been their voice before God, and God's voice before them. Soon, Joshua would take his place, but Joshua would face different challenges. The wilderness had been harsh, but simple. Follow the cloud, gather the manna, trust and obey. The promised land would offer temptations the desert never could. Prosperity, comfort, the allure of foreign gods who promised easy victories and abundant harvests. Moses' voice grew heavy as he turned to one of the most painful chapters in their history. The memory of Kadesh Barnea still stung like an old wound that never quite healed. In chapter 1, verses 19-25, he reminded them of the journey to that fateful place. "Then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrifying wilderness that you saw, on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us. And we came to Kadesh Barnea, and I said to you, 'You have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us.'" The irony was bitter. God had said he was giving them the land, present tense, as good as done, but the people had wanted to see for themselves first. Moses continued his account in verses 22-25. Then all of you came near to me and said, "Let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us, and bring us word again of the way by which we must go up, and the cities into which we shall come." The thing seemed good to me, and I took 12 men from you, 1 man from each tribe. And they turned and went up into the hill country, and came to the valley of Eshcol, and spied it out. And they took in their hands some of the fruit of the land, and brought it down to us, and brought us word again, and said, "It is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us." The fruit had been magnificent, grapes so large it took 2 men to carry a single cluster, pomegranates bursting with juice, figs sweet as honey. The land was everything God had promised and more. But what started as wisdom had turned into disaster. In verses 26-28, Moses recounted the tragic outcome. "Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. And you murmured in your tents and said, 'Because the Lord hated us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt, to give us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us.' Where are we going up? Our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, 'The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakim there.' The giants, the fortified cities, the fear that had paralyzed an entire generation. 10 of the 12 spies had returned with reports that focused on the obstacles rather than God's promises. They had seen the same fruit, the same land, the same enemies. But where Joshua and Caleb had seen God's faithfulness about to be fulfilled, the majority had seen only impossibility. Moses remembered that dark night when the people had actually talked about choosing a new leader to take them back to Egypt. They preferred the certainty of slavery to the uncertainty of trusting God. The rebellion at Kadesh Barnea had cost them 40 years of wandering, and an entire generation had paid the ultimate price for their lack of faith. Now their children stood where their parents should have stood decades earlier. As Moses continued his address, his tone shifted to something more personal, more painful. The people had no idea how many times Moses had literally saved their lives through prayer. Throughout their wilderness journey, he had repeatedly thrown himself between God's wrath and the people's destruction. Time after time, when Israel complained, rebelled, or turned away from God, Moses had pleaded for their lives like a father protecting his children. In chapter 1, verse 37, Moses mentioned something that revealed the depth of his sacrifice. "Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account and said, 'You also shall not go in there.'" The phrase, "on your account," was loaded with meaning. Moses' exclusion from the promised land wasn't just about his own sin, it was connected to theirs. Later in chapter 9, verses 18-20, Moses would describe one of these desperate intercessions. "Then I lay prostrate before the Lord as before, 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because of all the sin that you had committed in doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure that the Lord bore against you, so that he was ready to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me that time also. And the Lord was very angry with Aaron also, and was ready to destroy him. And I prayed for Aaron also at the same time." Picture that scene. Moses, the great leader, prostrate on his face for 40 days and nights without food or water, begging God not to destroy the very people who had just betrayed everything they claimed to believe. His brother Aaron, who had helped make the golden calf, would have died if Moses hadn't interceded for him too. This was the burden Moses had carried, not just leadership, but the spiritual weight of an entire nation's relationship with God. Every rebellion brought the threat of divine judgment. Every complaint risked God's patience. Every act of unfaithfulness required someone to stand in the gap, and that someone was always Moses. The people saw him as their leader, their lawgiver, their judge. They came to him with their disputes, their questions, their needs. But Moses knew himself as something else entirely. an intercessor standing in the gap between human failure and divine justice, a man who had worn out his knees praying for people who often didn't even realize they needed saving. The weight of leadership had taken its toll on Moses personally, and nowhere was this more evident than in his own exclusion from the Promised Land. In chapter 3, verses 23 to 26, he shared something deeply personal with the people, revealing the heart of a man who had sacrificed everything for their sake. And I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Please let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country and Lebanon. Here was Moses, the great leader who had spoken with God face to face, pleading like a child to see the land he had led them toward for 4 decades. His words revealed the heart of a man who loved the land God had promised, who longed to walk its hills and taste its fruit, who wanted to see God's promises fulfilled with his own eyes. But his next words revealed the heartbreaking answer. But the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And the Lord said to me, Enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan. The incident at Meribah had sealed Moses' fate. In a moment of frustration with the people's constant complaints about water, Moses had struck the rock twice instead of speaking to it as God had commanded. It seemed like such a small thing. The water had flowed, the people had drunk, their thirst had been satisfied. But in that moment, Moses had failed to honor God's specific instructions, and it had cost him his deepest dream. Numbers 20:12 had recorded God's judgment. Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. Moses, the great leader who had interceded for others countless times, could not intercede for himself in this matter. The irony was crushing and complete. The people's faithlessness had led to their parents' death in the wilderness, and now their continued rebellion and complaints had contributed to Moses' exclusion from the Promised Land. The man who had given his life for their salvation would watch from Mount Nebo as they entered the inheritance he would never possess. But Moses didn't want the people to focus on failure and judgment. Despite everything, the rebellions, the complaints, the golden calf, the constant grumbling, God had remained faithful to his promises. In chapter 2, verses 7 to 8, Moses reminded them of something beautiful. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. So we went on, away from our brothers, the people of Esau who live in Seir, away from the Arabah road from Elath and Etzion-Geber. Think about that phrase. You have lacked nothing. For 40 years in a desert where nothing grew, where water was scarce, where survival seemed impossible, God had provided everything they needed. Their clothes hadn't worn out, their feet hadn't swollen, their bodies had remained strong enough to travel and fight and build and live. In chapter 8, verses 2 to 4, Moses would elaborate on this miracle. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Every morning for 14,600 mornings, bread had appeared on the ground around their camp. When they needed water, it had flowed from rocks. When they were attacked by enemy armies, God had given them victory. When they were sick, he had healed them. When they were lost, he had guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. The people had complained about the food, calling the manna this worthless food. They had grumbled about the water, accusing Moses of bringing them into the wilderness to die of thirst. They had questioned the journey, the leadership, and even God himself. But through all their grumbling and rebellion, God had never stopped caring for them. His faithfulness wasn't dependent on their faithfulness. It flowed from his character, not their performance. When they were unlovable, he loved them. When they were ungrateful, he provided for them. When they were unfaithful, he remained faithful because he could not deny himself. In chapter 4, verses 41 to 43, Moses demonstrated something beautiful about God's character by establishing 3 cities of refuge east of the Jordan River. Then Moses set apart 3 cities in the east beyond the Jordan, that the manslayer might flee there, anyone who kills his neighbor unintentionally, without being at enmity with him in time past. He may flee to one of these cities and save his life. Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland for the Reubenites, Ramoth in Gilead for the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan for the Manassites. This wasn't just about legal procedure or ancient jurisprudence. It was about understanding God's heart toward justice and mercy. In a culture where family revenge was not just expected but required, where blood demanded blood and honor required retaliation, God created places of mercy for those whose hands were stained with innocent blood through no evil intent of their own. Picture the scenarios these cities were designed to address. A man chopping wood whose axe head flies off the handle and strikes someone walking by. A hunter whose arrow misses its target and kills another hunter. A builder whose stone falls from a roof and crushes someone below. These were tragedies, not murders. Accidents, not assassinations. The result was the same. Someone was dead, but the intent was completely different. The cities of refuge showed that God distinguishes between intentional murder and tragic accidents. Justice demanded that innocent blood be avenged, but mercy recognized that not all killing was malicious. Someone who had never intended harm, who was devastated by the tragedy they had caused, shouldn't die for an accident that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. These cities would be strategically placed so that no one in the territory east of the Jordan would be more than a day's journey from safety. The roads would be maintained, signs would be posted, and the gates would always be open. When someone's life was in danger through no fault of their own, God provided a way of escape, a place where they could live in safety until the death of the high priest allowed them to return home. It was a perfect picture of how God himself operates, passionate about justice, but equally passionate about mercy. He doesn't excuse sin or ignore guilt, but he provides refuge for those who seek him with honest hearts. Moses' voice carried a note of urgent warning as he looked toward the future his people would soon inherit. In chapter 6, verses 10 to 12, he painted a picture of coming prosperity that was also a picture of coming danger. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This was perhaps the most dangerous moment in Israel's future. Not the battles they would fight against the Canaanite armies or the enemies they would face in conquest, but the prosperity they would enjoy after victory. Moses knew something about human nature that the people didn't yet understand. It's easier to trust God when you're desperate than when you're comfortable. Easier to pray when you need help than when everything is going well. In the wilderness, they'd been forced to trust God for everything. They couldn't store up manna for tomorrow. It would rot and breed worms. They couldn't dig wells for permanent water sources. They had to trust God to provide springs in the desert. They couldn't build houses for permanent shelter. They had to trust God to guide them to the next stopping place. Every day brought fresh reminders of their complete dependence on Him. But in the promised land, they would live in cities they didn't build, sleep in houses they didn't construct, eat from vineyards they didn't plant, drink from wells they didn't dig. Success would come quickly, and with it would come the dangerous temptation to think they had earned it themselves, that their own strength and wisdom had brought them prosperity. In chapter 8, verses 17 to 18, Moses made this danger explicit. "Beware, lest you say in your heart, 'My power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth.' You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may confirm His covenant that He swore to your fathers, as it is this day." Prosperity wasn't evil, but it was dangerous. When your stomach is full and your bank account is healthy, when your crops are flourishing and your flocks are multiplying, it's easy to forget the God who gave you the strength to work, the rain to water your fields, and the opportunity to succeed. Success has a way of making people think they're self-made when they're actually God-blessed. As Moses concluded this first section of his address, he established a theme that would echo throughout the entire book of Deuteronomy, and indeed throughout the rest of Israel's history. In chapter 4, verse 9, he gave them a charge that would determine their future as a nation. "Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children." The word "remember" would appear again and again in Moses' speeches. Remember the day you stood before Mount Sinai and heard God's voice. Remember how God brought you out of Egypt with signs and wonders. Remember the covenant He made with your fathers. Remember His commandments and statutes. Remember His faithfulness through 40 years of wilderness wandering. But this wasn't just about personal memory. It was about generational legacy and national identity. In verses 10 to 11, Moses continued, "How on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, 'Gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children so.' And you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and gloom." The stories weren't just history. They were curriculum for the future. Every father needed to tell his children about the plagues that devastated Egypt, the night when death passed over their houses, the crossing of the Red Sea on dry ground, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Every mother needed to explain why they ate unleavened bread during Passover, why they celebrated the festivals, why they followed God's commands instead of living like the nations around them. In chapter 6, verses 6-7, Moses would make this even more explicit. "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." This wasn't formal education that happened once a week or once a year. This was life education that happened constantly, naturally, deliberately. Memory was their weapon against forgetting. Stories were their defense against the complacency that comes with prosperity. The next generation would face different challenges in a different environment, but they would need the same God who had brought their parents through the wilderness and into the land of promise. Moses shifted his tone as he began the second major part of his address. What he was about to tell them would shake everything they thought they knew about themselves. In chapter 9, verses 4-6, he delivered words that cut through any pride they might have harbored. "Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, 'It is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in.' to possess this land. Whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The people needed to understand something fundamental. They weren't getting the promised land because they deserved it. The Canaanites were losing their land because of their wickedness, not because Israel was particularly righteous. This wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was grace, pure and simple. Moses drove the point home even harder in verse 6. Know therefore that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. The Hebrew word for stubborn literally meant stiff-necked, like an ox that refuses to turn when the farmer pulls on the reins. Israel was difficult, rebellious, hard to lead. But then Moses revealed the real reason for their selection in chapter 7, verses 7 to 8. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They were the smallest nation, not the largest, the most stubborn, not the most obedient. God's choice had nothing to do with their size, their strength, their righteousness, or their potential. He chose them simply because he loved them. He kept his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not because their descendants had earned it, but because God always keeps his word. This was a revolutionary concept in the ancient world where gods typically chose the strongest, the richest, the most successful peoples to be their followers. But the God of Israel operated by different rules entirely. His love wasn't based on merit. It was based on his own character and faithfulness. Moses knew the people needed to understand just how patient God had been with them, so he reminded them of their worst moment, the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai. In chapter 9, verses 8-12, he recounted the devastating details. Even at Horeb, you provoked the Lord to wrath, and the Lord was so angry with you that he was ready to destroy you. When I went up the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord made with you, I remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water, and the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God, and on them were all the words that the Lord had spoken with you on the mountain out of the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And at the end of 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Then the Lord said to me, Arise, go down quickly from here, for your people whom you have brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made themselves a metal image. Picture the scene, Moses on the mountain, fasting for 40 days and nights, receiving the law written by God's own finger. Below, the people grew impatient. They couldn't see Moses, couldn't hear from God, couldn't stand the uncertainty. So they did the unthinkable. They made a God they could see and touch. Moses' anger when he descended the mountain was legendary. In verses 15 to 17, he described his reaction. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain was burning with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. And I looked, and behold, you had sinned against the Lord, your God. You had made yourselves a golden calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord had commanded you. And I took hold of the 2 tablets and threw them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. The tablets, written by God himself, shattered on the rocks. It was a perfect picture of what the people had done to their relationship with God. They had broken the covenant before they had even received it formally, but then came the part that revealed Moses' heart. In verses 18-20, he described his intercession. Then I lay prostrate before the Lord as before, 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of all the sin that you had committed in doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure that the Lord bore against you, so that he was ready to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me that time also. And the Lord was very angry with Aaron also, and was ready to destroy him. And I prayed for Aaron also at the same time, another 40 days without food or water, pleading for the lives of people who had just betrayed everything they claimed to believe. Moses saved not just the people, but also his own brother Aaron, who had helped make the golden calf. This was grace in action, undeserved mercy flowing through a mediator who cared more about their souls than his own comfort. Now Moses turned to the heart of the covenant relationship. In chapter 5, verse 1, he called for their complete attention, and Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the rules that I speak in your ears today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them." This wasn't just a history lesson. This was their constitution, their way of life, their guide for the future. He began recounting the 10 Commandments, but these weren't exactly the same as the ones given at Sinai. Moses was speaking to a new generation who would face different challenges. In verses 6-7, he started, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." The first commandment wasn't, "Don't worship other gods." It was, "Remember who I am." God identified himself not as a cosmic force or philosophical principle, but as the one who had personally rescued them from slavery. Every commandment that followed was based on this relationship. When Moses reached the 4th commandment, about the Sabbath, he gave a different reason than the one at Sinai. In verses 14-15, he said, "But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant, or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. At Sinai, the Sabbath was connected to God's rest after creation. Here it was connected to their liberation from slavery. In Egypt, they had worked 7 days a week with no rest. Now they were free, and their freedom included the right to rest. Even their servants and animals deserved rest because God's people understood what it meant to be oppressed. The commandments weren't arbitrary rules. They were expressions of God's character and reminders of their identity as his redeemed people. Each law reflected what it meant to live as those who had been set free. In chapter 6, verses 4-5, Moses proclaimed what would become the most famous words in all of Judaism. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." This wasn't just another commandment. This was the foundation of everything else. The word "hear" in Hebrew meant more than just listening with your ears. It meant to pay attention, to understand, to obey. This was a call to focus completely on what Moses was about to say. "The Lord is one" was a revolutionary statement in a world filled with many gods. The Egyptians had hundreds of deities. The Canaanites worshipped different gods for different needs, one for fertility, another for war, another for the harvest. But Israel's God was one, complete, sufficient for every need. The command to love God with all your heart, soul, and might meant total devotion. Your heart was your emotions and desires. Your soul was your life itself. Your might was your strength and resources. Nothing was to be held back. Nothing was to be divided between God and other loyalties. This love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice, a commitment, a way of life. In verses 6 to 9, Moses explained how this love was to be lived out. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Love for God wasn't a private matter. It shaped everything. How you talked to your children, how you conducted business, how you decorated your home, how you started and ended each day. God's words were to be so much a part of their lives that they couldn't escape them even if they wanted to. Moses revealed something beautiful about God's laws. They weren't burdens to bear, but gifts to treasure. The word pedagogy means the method and practice of teaching, and Moses was establishing a teaching method that would last for generations. In chapter 6, verses 20-25, he outlined how parents should respond when their children asked about the laws. When your son asks you in time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules that the Lord our God has commanded you? Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders, great and grievous, against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household, before our eyes. And he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in and give us the land that he swore to give to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as we are this day. And it will be righteousness for us, if we are careful to do all this commandment before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us. Notice the progression. Start with the story of salvation, then explain that the laws are for our good always. The commandments weren't God's way of making life difficult. They were his way of protecting and blessing his people. Every law had a purpose. Every rule had a reason, and that reason was love. The teaching was to be natural, conversational, constant. When children asked questions, parents were ready with answers. When they sat at meals, walked on journeys, lay down at night, or got up in the morning, God's words were part of the conversation. In chapter 11, verses 18-21, Moses expanded this idea. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you are sitting in your house, and when you are walking by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. This wasn't education that happened once a week in a formal setting. This was life education that happened constantly, naturally, joyfully. The goal wasn't just to memorize rules, but to internalize a way of thinking and living that honored God. In chapter 12, verses 1-7, Moses announced a change that would transform Israel from a loose tribal confederation into a unified nation. These are the statutes and rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess all the days that you live on the earth. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess served their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their asherim with fire. You shall chop down the carved images of their gods and destroy their name out of that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. This was revolutionary. Up until now, people could build altars and offer sacrifices wherever they felt led. Abraham had built altars at various places during his journey. Jacob had worshipped at Bethel. But now, all sacrifice would happen at one central location that God would choose. Why this change? First, it would prevent the mixing of true worship with pagan practices. The Canaanites worshipped at high places, under trees, at multiple locations. By centralizing worship, Israel would avoid contamination. Second, it would unite the tribes. 3 times a year, every male would come to this central place for the festivals. Families from Dan in the north would meet families from Beersheba in the south. They would worship together, eat together, celebrate together. Unity would be built through shared worship. In verses 8 to 12, Moses explained that this wasn't how they had been operating in the wilderness. You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing whatever is right in his own eyes, for you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance that the Lord your God is giving you. But when you go over the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and when he gives you rest from all your enemies around, so that you live in safety, then to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, and all your finest vow offerings that you vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male servants and your female servants, and the Levite that is within your towns, since he has no portion or inheritance with you. This central place would become the heart of the nation, the place where God's name would dwell, the location that would unite them as one people under one God. Moses knew that in the future, people would claim to speak for God, so he gave them a clear test to distinguish true prophets from false ones. In chapter 13, verses 1 to 5, he laid out the criteria. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, "Let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them," you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of slavery, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk, so you shall purge the evil from your midst. This was startling. A prophet could perform genuine miracles, predict the future accurately, and still be false if he led people away from the God who had brought them out of Egypt. Signs and wonders weren't enough. The message had to align with what God had already revealed. The test wasn't just about supernatural power, but about spiritual direction. Where was the prophet leading people? Toward the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or toward other gods? Toward obedience to the covenant, or toward rebellion against it? In chapter 18, verses 20-22, Moses gave another test. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You do not need to be afraid of him. False prophets could be identified by their fruits. Did their predictions come true? Did they lead people toward God or away from him? Did their lives match their message? These tests would protect the people from deception for generations to come. Moses looked into the future and saw that Israel would eventually want a king like the other nations. Instead of forbidding this, he gave them guidelines that would ensure their king remained under God's authority. In chapter 17, verses 14 to 20, he outlined the revolutionary principles that would govern kingship in Israel. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. These restrictions weren't arbitrary. Horses represented military might and often came from Egypt, which would create dependence on their former oppressors. Many wives meant foreign alliances and foreign gods. Excessive wealth led to oppression of the people and trust in riches rather than God. But the most important requirement came in verses 18 to 20. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. The king had to write out a copy of God's law with his own hand and read it every day. This wasn't just ceremonial, it was practical. Writing the law would help him memorize it. Reading it daily would keep it fresh in his mind. Most importantly, it would remind him daily that he was not above God's law, but under it. This was revolutionary in the ancient world, where kings were often considered gods themselves, or at least above human law. But in Israel, even the king was accountable to God's word and bound by his commandments. As Moses continued laying out the foundation for Israel's future, he made a promise that would echo through centuries. In chapter 18, verses 15 to 19, he spoke words that carried both comfort and warning. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall come to pass that whoever will not listen to my words that he speaks in my name, I myself will require it of him. This wasn't just another prophet Moses was promising. This was someone like me. What made Moses unique? He had spoken with God face to face. He had performed signs and wonders that delivered an entire nation. He had received God's law directly from heaven. He had interceded between God and the people when judgment threatened. The prophet to come would share these same characteristics. The people had been terrified when God spoke from Mount Sinai. The thunder, lightning, and fire had made them beg Moses to be their go-between. They couldn't handle hearing God's voice directly, so God promised them a solution. He would speak through prophets, with one ultimate prophet who would be like Moses in every way. But this promise came with a serious warning. In verse 19, God said he would personally hold people accountable for rejecting this future prophet's words. This wasn't an optional message. It would carry the full authority of heaven itself. The mystery of this promise would unfold over centuries. Who would this prophet be? When would he come? How would they recognize him? Moses didn't provide those details. He simply assured them that God would not leave them without a voice, without guidance, without someone to stand between them and the holy fire of God's presence. This prophet would speak God's words with the same authority Moses had carried. Rejecting his message would be the same as rejecting God himself. It was both a comfort for the future and a responsibility they couldn't ignore. Moses had already established 3 cities of refuge east of the Jordan River, but now he outlined the complete system that would operate in the Promised Land. In chapter 19, verses 1-7, he explained how justice and mercy would work together. When the Lord your God cuts off the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and dwell in their cities and in their houses, you shall set apart 3 cities for yourselves in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall measure the distances and divide into 3 parts the area of the land that the Lord your God gives you as a possession, so that any manslayer can flee to them. This is the provision for the manslayer, who by fleeing there may save his life. If anyone kills his neighbor unintentionally without having hated him in the past, as when someone goes into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of blood in hot anger pursue the manslayer and overtake him, because the way is long, and strike him fatally, though the man did not deserve to die, since he had not hated his neighbor in the past. The system was carefully designed. 6 cities total, 3 on each side of the Jordan River. The distances were measured so no one would be more than a day's journey from safety. The roads were maintained and clearly marked. When someone's life hung in the balance because of a tragic accident, they could find refuge. Moses gave a specific example. 2 men go into the forest to cut wood. One man's axe head flies off the handle and kills his friend. It was a complete accident with no malicious intent, but the dead man's family would demand blood revenge according to ancient custom. Without the cities of refuge, an innocent man would die for a tragic accident, but the system had built-in protections against abuse. In verses 11-13, Moses warned, "But if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and attacks him and strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees into one of these cities, then the elders of his city shall send and take him from there and hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. Your eye shall not pity him, but you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, so that it may be well with you." Premeditated murder couldn't hide behind the refuge system. If investigation revealed hatred, planning, or intentional killing, the murderer would be handed over for justice. The cities protected the innocent, not the guilty. This balance between justice and mercy reflected God's own character. He wasn't soft on sin, but he distinguished between different types of wrongdoing. Accidents weren't treated the same as intentional crimes. Intent mattered, circumstances mattered, and mercy had a place alongside justice. When Moses turned to the subject of warfare, he established principles that were revolutionary for the ancient world. In chapter 20, verses 1-4, he began with the Foundation. When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory. Before every battle, a priest would remind the soldiers that God was fighting with them. This wasn't just psychological encouragement, it was theological truth. Their victories would come from God's power, not their own military might. But then Moses established exemptions that no other ancient army would have considered. In verses 5 to 8, he listed who should not fight. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, Is there any man who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man enjoy its fruit. And is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man take her. And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. New homeowners, new farmers, newly engaged men, and anyone who was afraid, all were excused from military service. This would have seemed like military suicide to other nations, but Moses was teaching them that God's blessing mattered more than military strength. A man should enjoy the fruit of his labor and the love of his wife. Fear was contagious and could demoralize an entire army. The warfare code even included environmental protection. In verses 19-20, Moses commanded, When you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Are the trees in the field human, that they should be besieged by you? Only the trees that you know are not trees for food you may destroy and cut down, that you may build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it falls. Fruit trees were innocent victims of war. They provided food and would be needed after the victory. Destroying them was wasteful and cruel. Only non-fruit trees could be cut down for siege equipment. Even in warfare, there were limits to destruction. Moses addressed a situation that would test the community's commitment to justice. In chapter 21, verses 1-9, he outlined what to do when a murder victim was found, but the killer couldn't be identified. If in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. And the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked, and has never pulled in a yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was a profound statement about corporate responsibility. When innocent blood was shed within a community's borders, that community bore some responsibility, even if they couldn't identify the specific killer. The ritual continued in verses 6-8. And all the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall testify, Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. The elders had to publicly declare their innocence, while acknowledging their community's responsibility. They hadn't personally committed the murder, but they lived in a society where such violence could occur. The animal's death symbolically absorbed the guilt that would otherwise contaminate the entire community. This ceremony taught several important principles. First, innocent blood cries out for justice, and God hears that cry. Second, communities are responsible for the violence that occurs within their borders. Third, guilt must be dealt with, either through finding the perpetrator or through symbolic atonement. The ritual concluded with a promise in verse 9. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about maintaining the moral health of the entire community. Moses wove threads of practical compassion throughout the civil laws, showing that God cared about the smallest details of daily life. In chapter 22, verses 1 to 4, he began with lost property. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and ignore them. You shall take them back to your brother. And if he does not live near you, and you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall stay with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. And so you shall do with his donkey, or with his garment, or with any lost thing of your brother's, which he loses and you find. You may not ignore it. You shall not see your brother's donkey, or his ox fallen down by the way and ignore them. You shall help him to lift them up again. These weren't just property laws, they were relationship laws. When you saw your neighbor's animal wandering, you couldn't just ignore it and walk away. You had to actively help, even if it was inconvenient. If you didn't know who owned it, you had to care for it until the owner came looking. The law about animals fallen on the road was especially significant. Helping someone lift a heavy ox or donkey was hard work, but it was required. Your neighbor's need created an obligation for you to help, regardless of your own schedule or convenience. Moses continued with an environmental protection law in verse 6 to 7. If you come across a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go. But the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long. This simple law ensured the continuation of bird populations. Taking eggs or young birds for food was permitted, but the mother had to be released so she could breed again. It was an early form of wildlife conservation, showing respect for God's creation and concern for future generations. Safety regulations appeared in verse 8. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall from it. Flat roofs were common in Israel, used for drying grain, social gatherings, and sleeping on hot nights. A low wall around the edge would prevent accidents and save lives. Even work animals receive protection in chapter 25, verse 4. You shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. The ox that worked to separate grain from chaff deserved to eat some of that grain. It was simple fairness. Those who worked deserved to benefit from their labor. Moses established comprehensive laws protecting the family structure and sexual purity. These weren't prudish restrictions, but protective barriers around the foundation of society. In chapter 22, verses 13 to 21, he addressed the serious issue of false accusations against a new bride. If any man takes a wife and goes in to her and then hates her and accuses her of misconduct and brings a bad name upon her, saying, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find in her evidence of virginity, then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders of the city in the gate. The accusation was devastating. A husband claiming his new wife hadn't been a virgin. In that culture, such an accusation could result in the woman's death. But Moses protected women from false accusations by requiring evidence and proper investigation. If the accusation was false, verses 18-19 prescribed severe punishment for the husband. Then the elders of that city shall take the man and whip him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife. He may not divorce her all his days. The false accuser faced public humiliation, a massive fine, and the loss of his right to divorce. He would be stuck with a wife he had tried to destroy, while she would be protected from further abuse. For cases of actual adultery, the law was clear in verse 22. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. But Moses distinguished between adultery and rape. In verses 25-27, he protected rape victims. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country. And though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. The location mattered. In the countryside where no one could hear screams for help, the assumption was rape. The woman was treated as a victim, not a criminal. Only the rapist faced punishment. These laws protected both sexual purity and vulnerable people. They prevented false accusations while ensuring real crimes were punished. They distinguished between consent and force, between adultery and rape, between guilt and innocence. Moses introduced an economic system unlike anything in the ancient world. In chapter 15, verses 1-6, he announced the year of release. At the end of every 7 years you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may exact it, but whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release. But there will be no poor among you, for the Lord will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, if only you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you, as he promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, and you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. Every 7 years, all debts between Israelites would be completely cancelled. This prevented the permanent concentration of wealth in a few hands and gave everyone a fresh start. It was economic justice built into the very structure of society. Moses anticipated that people might become reluctant to lend money as the 7th year approached. In verses 7-11, he addressed this concern. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near. And your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. The approaching debt release wasn't an excuse to stop helping the poor. If anything, it should motivate more generosity, knowing that the debt would be forgiven anyway. God would bless those who gave freely, even when they knew they wouldn't be repaid. The year of release also applied to Hebrew slaves. In verses 12 to 15, Moses commanded, "If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him." Freedom wasn't enough. The freed slave needed resources to start a new life. The master was required to provide generous supplies from his livestock, grain, and wine. This prevented freed slaves from immediately falling back into poverty and debt. Moses concluded this section by establishing 3 annual festivals that would unite the scattered tribes and create lasting national identity. In chapter 16, verses 1 to 8, he began with Passover. "Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock or the herd, at the place that the Lord will choose, to make his name dwell there. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that all the days of your life you may remember the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. No leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory for 7 days, nor shall any of the flesh that you sacrifice on the evening of the first day remain all night until morning." Passover wasn't just a religious ceremony. It was a national memory exercise. Every family would gather annually to remember their deliverance from Egypt. The unleavened bread would remind them of their hasty departure. The sacrifice would point back to the lambs whose blood had protected their firstborn. Children would ask questions, and parents would tell the story again. The Festival of Weeks came next in verses 9 to 12. "You shall count 7 weeks. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Then you shall keep the Festival of Weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a free will offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite who is within your towns, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are among you, at the place that the Lord your God will choose, to make his name dwell there. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes." This harvest festival celebrated God's provision and included everyone: family, members, servants, foreigners, orphans, and widows. No one was left out of the celebration. The reminder that they had been slaves in Egypt motivated them to include the marginalized in their joy. The final festival was the Feast of Booths in verses 13 to 15. "You shall keep the Feast of Booths 7 days, when you have gathered in the produce from your threshing floor and your winepress. You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to the Lord your God at the place that the Lord will choose, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful." This autumn festival celebrated the final harvest and reminded them of their wilderness wandering when they lived in temporary shelters. Again, everyone was included in the celebration. No one was forgotten or left behind. These 3 festivals required all males to appear before the Lord at the central sanctuary. Families would travel from across the land, meet relatives they hadn't seen all year, worship together, and strengthen their bonds as one people under one God. Moses' voice carried a new urgency as he described a ceremony that would mark their entry into the Promised Land. In chapter 27, verses 1 to 8, he gave detailed instructions for an event that would bind them to their covenant forever. Now Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, "Keep the whole commandment that I command you today, and on the day you cross over the Jordan to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall set up large stones and plaster them with plaster. And you shall write on them all the words of this law when you cross over to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you. And when you have crossed over the Jordan, you shall set up these stones, concerning which I command you today, on Mount Ebal, and you shall plaster them with plaster. And there you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall wield no iron tool on them. You shall build an altar to the Lord your God of uncut stones. And you shall offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God. And you shall sacrifice peace offerings, and shall eat there. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. And you shall write on the stones all the words of this law very plainly." Picture the scene Moses was describing. The moment they crossed the Jordan River, they would go to Mount Ebal and set up large stones, covering them with plaster and writing God's entire law on them. These wouldn't be hidden in a temple or locked away in a palace. They would be public, visible to everyone who passed by. Then came the dramatic ceremony itself. In verses 11 to 14, Moses outlined the positioning. That day, Moses charged the people, saying, "When you have crossed over the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these shall stand on Mount Ebal for the curse: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And the Levites shall declare to all the men of Israel in a loud voice." Two mountains facing each other with the valley between them, 6 tribes. On Mount Gerizim would speak blessings for those who obeyed God's law. 6 tribes on Mount Ebal would declare curses for those who broke it. The Levites in the valley would shout so everyone could hear. The curses that followed in verses 15-26 covered the hidden sins people might think they could get away with. "Cursed be the man who makes a carved or cast metal image, an abomination to the Lord, a thing made by the hands of a craftsman, and sets it up in secret." Each curse ended with the people responding, "Amen. So be it, we agree." This ceremony would make the choice crystal clear. Obedience brought blessing, disobedience brought curse. There was no middle ground, no gray area, no excuse of ignorance. Every person would personally say amen to both the blessings and the curses, making themselves accountable for their choices. In chapter 28, Moses revealed something that would prove both heartbreaking and hope-giving: a vision of Israel's entire future history. He began with the blessings that would come from obedience in verses 1-6, "And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out." The blessings covered every area of life: their cities and countryside, their children and livestock, their food storage and daily bread, their coming and going. God would bless them so abundantly that other nations would marvel at their prosperity. But then Moses' tone grew dark as he described what would happen when they turned away from God. The curses in verses 15-68 were detailed and terrifying. Disease would strike them. Their crops would fail. Enemy armies would defeat them. Eventually, they would be scattered among the nations where their ancestors had never lived. In verses 64-67, Moses described exile with chilling accuracy. And the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. And among these nations you shall find no respite, and there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot, but the Lord will give you there a trembling heart and failing eyes and a languishing soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day you shall be in dread and have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, if only it were evening. And at evening you shall say, if only it were morning. Because of the dread that your heart shall feel, and the sights that your eyes shall see. This wasn't just punishment. It was the natural result of breaking their covenant with God. When they rejected him, they would lose everything that made them a nation, their land, their unity, their identity, their peace. But Moses didn't end with exile. In chapter 30, verses 1-6, he revealed God's ultimate plan for restoration. And when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your soul. Then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you, and he will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it, and he will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. This was grace beyond imagination. Even after they had broken the covenant, scattered among the nations, and lost everything, God would bring them back. He would actually change their hearts so they could love him the way they were supposed to love him from the beginning. With his prophetic vision complete, Moses presented them with the most important decision any human being could ever make. In chapter 30, verses 11-14, he made it clear this wasn't beyond their ability. For this commandment that I command you today is not too hard for you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven, that you should say, who will ascend to heaven for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very near you, it is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it. Moses was cutting off every excuse. They couldn't claim God's law was too difficult to understand or too far away to reach. They had heard it with their own ears, learned it from their parents, taught it to their children. The choice was within their grasp. Then came the moment that would echo through all of human history. In verses 15-20, Moses presented the ultimate choice. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, and by keeping his commandments and his statutes and his rules, then you shall live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away, and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are going over the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. This wasn't just a choice for them, it was a choice for their children and grandchildren. The decision they made would affect generations. Moses called heaven and earth as witnesses because this choice was so important that all creation needed to remember it. The choice was simple but profound: life or death, blessing or curse, following God or turning away from Him. Moses urged them to choose life, not just for themselves but for their descendants. God Himself was their life and the source of their days. To choose Him was to choose everything good. To reject Him was to choose destruction. This choice wouldn't end with them. Every generation of God's people would face the same decision. Would they love God with all their heart, obey His voice, and hold fast to Him? Or would they turn away to worship other gods and lose everything? The choice was always theirs to make. The time had come for Moses to step aside and pass leadership to the next generation. In chapter 31, verses 1-8, Moses called the entire nation together for this emotional transition. So Moses continued to speak these words to all Israel. And he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I am no longer able to go out and come in. The Lord has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. The Lord your God Himself will go over before you. He will destroy these nations before you, so that you shall dispossess them. And Joshua will go over at your head, as the Lord has spoken. And the Lord will do to them as He did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, and to their land when He destroyed them. And the Lord will give them over to you, and you shall do to them according to the whole commandment that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Moses was 120 years old, but still strong enough to lead. His exclusion from the Promised Land wasn't because of physical weakness, but because of God's judgment. The irony was bitter. The man who had brought them this far couldn't finish the journey, but Moses didn't focus on his own disappointment. Instead, he encouraged both the people and Joshua. God Himself would go before them. Joshua wouldn't be leading alone. The same God who had destroyed Sihon and Og would destroy the Canaanite nations. Victory was assured because God was fighting. For them, the public commissioning was important. In verses 14 to 15, God Himself appeared to confirm the transfer of leadership. And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, the days approach when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting, that I may commission him. And Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. And the Lord appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud. And the pillar of cloud stood over the entrance of the tent. This wasn't just Moses passing a torch to Joshua. This was God officially appointing a new leader. The pillar of cloud, which had guided them through the wilderness for 40 years, appeared as God's visible sign of approval. In verse 23, God spoke directly to Joshua. And the Lord commissioned Joshua the son of Nun, and said, Be strong and courageous, for you shall bring the people of Israel into the land that I swore to give them. I will be with you. The same promise God had given to Moses was now given to Joshua. The presence and power of God would continue with the new leader. Before his death, Moses composed a song that would serve as both a celebration and a warning. In chapter 31, verses 19 to 22, God commanded this song to be written. Now therefore write this song and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel. For when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to give to their fathers, and they have eaten and are full and grown fat, they will turn to other gods and serve them, and despise me and break my covenant. And when many evils and troubles have come upon them, this song shall confront them as a witness, for it will live unforgotten in the mouths of their offspring. For I know what they are inclined to do even today, before I have brought them into the land that I swore to give. The song would serve as a witness against them when they broke the covenant. They couldn't claim ignorance or surprise when judgment came, because the song would remind them of God's warnings. The song itself, recorded in chapter 32, began with a call to attention in verses 1 to 4. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. Moses called heaven and earth as witnesses to God's perfect character. Whatever happened in Israel's future, it wouldn't be because God was unfaithful or unjust. His work was perfect, his ways were just, his faithfulness was absolute. The song continued with Israel's history in verses 7 to 14, describing how God had found them in the wilderness and cared for them like an eagle caring for its young. Then it described their future rebellion in verses 15-18. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The image was devastating. Israel like a spoiled child who kicks the parent who feeds him. Prosperity would lead to pride, pride to rebellion, rebellion to judgment. But even in judgment, God's mercy would ultimately prevail. Like Jacob before his death, Moses pronounced individual blessings on each of the 12 tribes. These weren't just nice words, they were prophetic declarations of each tribe's future role in the nation. In chapter 33, verses 1-5, Moses began, "This is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the people of Israel before his death. He said, The Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came from the 10,000s of holy ones with flaming fire at his right hand. Yes, he loved his people. All his holy ones were in his hand. So they followed in your steps, receiving direction from you, when Moses commanded us a law as a possession for the assembly of Jacob. Thus the Lord became king in Jeshurun, when the heads of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel, together. Moses began by remembering God's appearance at Sinai, emphasizing that these blessings came from the same God who had given them the law. He was their king, and they were his holy people. For Judah, Moses prayed in verse 7, "And this he said of Judah, Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him into his people. With his hands he contends for himself, and you shall be a help against his adversaries." Judah would be a warrior tribe, fighting for the people with God's help. Levi received a special blessing in verses 8-11. "And of Levi he said, Give to Levi your Thummim, and your Urim to your godly one, whom you tested at Massa, with whom you quarreled at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I regard them not. He disowned his brothers and ignored his children. For they observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach Jacob your rules and Israel your law. They shall put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Bless, O Lord, his substance, and accept the work of his hands. Crush the loins of his adversaries, of those who hate him, that they rise not again." The Levites would be the priests and teachers, more devoted to God than to their own families. They would teach the law and offer sacrifices. For Benjamin, Moses declared in verse 12, of Benjamin he said, "The beloved of the Lord dwells in safety by him. He covers him all day long and dwells between his shoulders." Benjamin would be protected and secure, dwelling safely under God's protection. Joseph received the longest and richest blessing in verses 13 to 17, including abundance from heaven and earth, the favor of God, and strength like a wild ox. Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, would become mighty tribes pushing back their enemies. Each blessing was unique, reflecting both the character of the tribe and God's plan for their future. Together, they formed a complete picture of the nation Israel would become. The time had come for Moses to leave them forever. In chapter 34, verses 1 to 4, Moses climbed alone to his final destination. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb, and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." From Mount Nebo, Moses could see the entire promised land spread out below him. God gave him supernaturally clear vision to see from Dan in the north to the Mediterranean, sea in the west, from the Jordan Valley to the southern desert. Every valley, every hill, every city he had longed to enter was visible from where he stood. God's words were both kind and heartbreaking. "I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." Moses had brought 2 million people to the edge of their inheritance, but he couldn't share in it himself. The price of leadership had been higher than anyone could imagine. Verses 5 to 7 described Moses' death with simple dignity. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his natural force unabated. Moses died alone with God, just as he had lived, in intimate communion with the Almighty. God himself buried Moses in an unmarked grave that no one would ever find. This prevented the grave from becoming a shrine where future generations might worship Moses instead of God. At 120 years old, Moses was still physically strong. His eyes were clear, his strength undiminished. He didn't die from old age or sickness, but simply because God called him home. His death was the final act of obedience in a life devoted to serving God and his people. The people mourned for 30 days, the same period of mourning reserved for kings and high priests. But their grief, however deep, couldn't bring back the greatest leader they would ever know. The book of Deuteronomy concluded with a tribute that placed Moses in a category all his own. In chapter 34, verses 10 to 12, the final words honored the man who had shaped a nation. "And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel." 3 things made Moses unique among all prophets. First, God knew him face to face. Other prophets received visions or dreams, but Moses spoke with God as directly as one friend speaks to another. The intimacy of their relationship was unmatched in human history. Second, the signs and wonders Moses performed in Egypt were unprecedented. 10 plagues, that brought the world's greatest empire to its knees. The parting of the Red Sea, water from rocks, manna from heaven, victory over enemies through raised hands. No prophet before or after would match this demonstration of divine power. Third, Moses did these mighty deeds in the sight of all Israel. This wasn't private revelation or hidden miracles. Millions of people witnessed God's power working through Moses for 40 years. They saw the plagues, crossed the sea, ate the manna, drank the water, followed the cloud. Moses' ministry was the most public and sustained demonstration of God's power in history. The phrase, "There has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses," was written from the perspective of later generations who had seen other prophets come and go. Samuel, Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all were great men of God, but none matched Moses in the directness of their relationship with God or the scope of their ministry. Moses stood alone as the mediator between God and his people, the lawgiver who established their national identity, the intercessor who repeatedly saved them from destruction, and the leader who brought them from slavery to the threshold of freedom. His death marked the end of an era that would never be repeated. If this journey through Deuteronomy has opened your eyes to something new about God's heart, about His love, or about the incredible depth of Scripture, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We're exploring the Bible's greatest stories together, discovering treasures hidden in plain sight, and seeing familiar passages with fresh eyes. And here's what I really need from you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Moses' message. Maybe it's a friend wrestling with big decisions, a family member searching for purpose, or someone who thinks the Bible is just a collection of old rules. Moses' story proves that Scripture is alive, relevant, and speaks directly to our hearts. Today, your share could be the bridge that brings someone else into this incredible journey of discovery. Together, we're not just studying ancient texts, we're uncovering the timeless truths that transform lives. Thanks for joining me on this adventure through Deuteronomy. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember Moses' final words: choose life that you and your descendants may live.